If you love liberty, declare your independence by signing the Shire Society Declaration at shiresociety.com.
You're all set there? We're going to open the public hearing on House Bill 1283 and call the prime sponsor, Representative Stone.
He's not here. I can either introduce it for him or post. I know we were supposed to just not up to speed, so he's up to the reference.
Representative, you are?
Representative Wallace, co-sponsor.
You're a co-sponsor. Why don't you come forward? We'll let you do that. Good morning, Representative.
Good morning. Again, for the record, my name is Representative Wallace. I represent Rockingham County District 33, towns of Brentwood, Danvers, and Fremont. House Bill 1283 is, we put forward this bill as to prohibit sobriety checks. In committee, we heard much testimony from law enforcement, and currently it seems that the vast majority of these checkpoints are producing about somewhere less than 10% efficacy for their intended purpose. Based on that, we feel that other areas of enforcement would be more appropriate, DUI patrols and things like that. And this federal money could be used for that, as opposed to the way it's being used now with these checkpoints. Okay. I've got a bit of a background in this. I'm a breathalyzer installer for the state of Massachusetts, and most of the individuals that we see in these checkpoints, a lot of these cases are dismissed for whatever reason, oftentimes because there isn't any actual driver. So where they may be over the influence, but they stop. And a lot of this evidence gets discarded at that in court proceedings. So that being said, we can probably have better results doing other methods. We have some other people with backgrounds in DUI defense that can support some of these positions. That's what their business is. So that's where we're at, and I'm open for any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Gannon has presented.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks for taking. I want to ask you, not the others, because I know you and we'll relate. Give me the 10% number, what that was first.
We had testimony from law enforcement that there's less than a 10% DWI arrest rate at these roadblocks. So that seems to be money poorly spent. If that's what your intended plan is, if you're getting a 10% return on investment, that money might be better allocated elsewhere in other strategies.
Follow up?
Let's follow.
The 10% doesn't sound bad to me, but we'll let that be your opinion versus mine. Do you not think that this sends a message to me who might be out on the road knowing that there's going to be checkpoints, or my kids? Do you think that the awareness of the checkpoints might keep people who would otherwise drink and drive off the roads?
Hopefully that would have that type of an effect, but in this technological age, there are usually warnings out there about the upcoming checkpoints. There's apps called Waze, for example, that already will indicate law enforcement activity just on routine traffic. And if there's a speed radar trap, and these are also being used to warn people of the upcoming roadblocks.
Thank you. Thanks for taking my question.
Senator Lasky, then Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Do you have any data about the number of cases where a checkpoint would be upheld by the court or be valid in the court?
I don't personally, but I believe we have some people that will testify to that. So we were presented with evidence in committee to that effect at the low efficacy rates.
Thank you.
Senator French.
So, thank you. The statement says less than 1%. Is it less than 1% or less than 10%?
You're reading the word?
Yeah, the word.
In committee, it may be as low as 1%. I think you'll find the state police have that information, and that's what the source was.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm a little, maybe you just need to clarify. When I think of a sobriety checkpoint, people are driving, they're stopped because they're queued up. because the police are gonna look to see if you're drunk. So how do cases get thrown out of court because someone's stopped? You actually have to be driving in your car and you stopped at the sobriety checkpoint.
I think the argument is made in the criminal proceeding that they may have been drunk behind the wheel, but they were not driving, they were stopped at a sobriety checkpoint. That's what we heard in testimony in committee.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Representative. The chair will call Representative Gagne. Good morning, Representative.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Sorry for my slowness.
That's okay.
Monday,
You're good.
I'm no longer 34, no longer 74, and I shouldn't be doing any martial arts. I am, for the record, my name is Larry Gagne. I'm from State Representative from Hillsborough County District 13, which encompasses Ward 6 in Manchester. When this bill first came to us, I became a co-sponsor because when the sobriety checkpoints first came into being, as a former police officer, I thought it was a bad idea. We were talking about Fourth Amendment rights here against unreasonable searches and seizure, and that 1%, Senator French, is correct. Less than 1% is if I remember right, of actual arrests from sobriety checkpoints are for DUI. Other arrests are made for possession of marijuana and other charges. To me, it's just one sidelight is that just about all the law enforcement personnel in sobriety checkpoints are on overtime, costing the state some money. And getting back to when I was a police officer, back in the 70s in Manchester, just good old-fashioned observational police work did the trick. Now, you know, you didn't have a captive audience like people coming through a sobriety checkpoint, but nevertheless, you know, here I was on a walking route, I remember one time, and catching somebody who was driving erratically. Pulled him over, and he was DUI. The fact that he was a lawyer didn't help him. So that's why I'm a co-sponsor of this. I don't think this is necessary. I think it's, again, back to the prior speaker, those funds could be used for many other worthwhile things. And just good old-fashioned police work will continue catching those who drive impaired.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Senator Hennessy has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you have any information about, excuse me, what percentage of people who are stopped, as you described it, I believe, with police observation, what percentage of those end up with DUI?
I would think less than 1%.
No, I don't mean in the sobriety, I'm sorry, clarify.
Okay.
The ones who are, I believe you were comparing a sobriety checkpoint with observations by police who see somebody they think is maybe inebriated and they pull them over. So in terms of when they're pulled over, is it a lot more than 1% of those that they stop?
I don't have that information. I just remember from my old days is how it was done. You were in a cruiser, you saw somebody driving erratically, you pulled them over, and then you did the roadside sobriety test. That was before breathalyzer, before all that. And we used to catch quite a few of them. So I think, and it was a lot less expensive and better usage of the badges to actually be out there and doing other things. I'm sure you'll hear, and I'm not dissing law enforcement, believe me, I was one, and I have great respect, but I think those assets could be used in much better, much better.
Thank you.
Senator Gannon.
Thanks for taking my question. Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you think maybe it would be best left to local control of an individual police chief and what he's learned, his experience, his town driving patterns? Wouldn't you say it would be best to let the local chief decide?
Thanks for your question, Senator Gannon. I think that would be like a cookie cutter type of law enforcement where if I drive to Nashua, okay, you don't have to worry about it. But if I drive from Manchester, I don't have to worry about Edinburgh. Someone might be stopped. I think it should be, the RSA should be reviewed.
Quick follow-up. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just was struck by what you said. You said I might have to worry, not you personally, but that in one town it would be one thing, another, it could be a different law. You said I might worry about wouldn't worrying make you not drink and drive if you didn't know what each individual town was?
People who drink and drive, with all due respect, Senator Gannon, do not care what the local law might be. They just hope that they get home on time.
Thank you.
That's why we have law enforcement to use their visual acuity to see that someone is driving erratically and they pull home.
Thanks for taking my question. Thank you.
Senator French.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for coming today. Would this cover all roadblocks and checkpoints? I mean, I was coming home a couple of years ago and I ran into 2 checkpoints in the same night. And I don't drink and drive. I was pulled over, told to go down the dark road to a schoolyard where they were observing people, drive down there. They asked me where I was coming from, where I was going, and I did not see where that had anything to do with whether I was sober or not. So would this stop any roadblocks or checkpoints for any reason, or just sobriety?
I don't know what the reason why they pulled you over. Perhaps they were looking for a suspect that fit your description or the car's description.
There's a lot of curves out there, I know.
But if you want my personal opinion, I'm not sure. My personal opinion would be that if they're looking for a suspect, I just go back to my prior experience. When we were looking for a suspect that fit a general description, or the car fit the general description of a getaway car or a bank robbery or an assault, you pulled that car over and you gave that individual reasons why they were being pulled over, not go here and park and get out of the car and go through the whole process of pat frisk or whatever it was. You knew why you were being stopped.
This was follow-up?
Yeah.
This was for sobriety, as they were stopping every car that was coming through and sending them down on the side of the road.
So, to me, that's an arrest without a warrant or without probable cause. That's my opinion.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The chair will call Representative Hines.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Dan Hines, representing the town of Merrimack, and for the record, I am a lawyer, and I primarily do DUI defense. That's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. I've handled approximately 1,000 cases. I am well familiar with this area of law, and I did intend to co-sponsor this, but I missed a sign-off period. But I'm strongly in support of the bill, and I'll address the 2 reasons why. So first, I'll describe how sobriety checkpoints work. So in New Hampshire, sobriety checkpoints are only allowed because the statute authorizes it. And besides this authorization, our Supreme Court has put additional safeguards into place. So generally speaking, the state need probable cause or at a minimum reasonable suspicion in order to stop and detain someone. Now, there's an exception for sobriety checkpoints, the rationale being that it's a temporary investigation. So our Supreme Court gives a little leeway, but for there to be a sobriety checkpoint, the town or the police department has to petition Superior Court for the sobriety checkpoint. And in that petition, they lay out how they're going to perform the sobriety checkpoint. So they're going to say where it's going to be, if they're going to stop every 3rd car or every 5th car or something that's subjective so that they're just not randomly arbitrarily stopping people, and it typically says how many police will be there and what the procedure is. So would they have someone pull over, what type of questions would they ask them? And then the Superior Court presumably granted the petition, otherwise the checkpoint would not be lawful. And part of the other requirement that our Supreme Court has given is that they have to advertise these checkpoints. So typically it's in a newspaper, or Manchester's one of the towns that frequently does checkpoints in the summer. And they put on their website, press release, say, a checkpoint. They don't say where it is, but they say it's in the town of Merrimack. So people are on notice. And then the night, typically they're done at night, when there's a checkpoint, there's a sign on the road saying checkpoint up ahead. Now, a lot of people, if they were actually under the influence, will turn around and avoid said checkpoint. I've seen that happen. So we are putting people on notice about the checkpoints. And the checkpoints, they're just ineffective. So my personal opinion is roughly about 1% of the people stopped at the checkpoint are arrested for DWI. And the way I gather that statistic is typically police departments afterwards, the media asks how it went, or the police just send it to the media, and they say how many drivers were stopped, and typically the number of arrests for certain things. And typically for every 100 drivers, I see one DWI arrest. There are more commonly arrests for other things. So it used to be the common one would be transporting marijuana, but now that we sort of legalized that, I don't see that happening much anymore. The other major one that people usually get arrested for are operating without a license. And I believe the testimony in the Criminal Justice Committee by the state police was that there's even less than 1% for DWI arrests. So I believe they're here today. If they testify to that, you can ask them on that. And if someone comes up with a number higher than 1%, I would try to determine an exact number for you, or I would submit to you the research that I relied on to come up with that 1%. And the reason, in response to your question about that percent versus the typical arrests, besides, look, I don't know the answer to what percentage of the average person stopped. I expect if an officer at night is pulling someone over for crossing the line, I would guess more than 1% of those result in a DWI arrest. You'd have to ask the police officer though. But besides looking at percentages, I think it's also important to look at raw numbers. So typically, police departments, when they do these Friday checkpoints, they put practically their entire police force in the area. So I've driven by checkpoints. It's typically around 5 to 10 police officers, so sometimes it's state police coordinating with local police, but every time I've seen it, it's always a minimum of 5 police. So in small towns, that's practically their entire police department. Now if you have your entire police department on one road, you're ignoring your entire town where people are committing DWI. So that's why the number is lower than I think it would be if you banned the checkpoints. So the reason checkpoints, besides not leading to many arrests, they are not a good indicator of impairment, don't lead to many convictions. So all state police in this state who are basically graduated from police academy have training in DWI detection. And they know that the first phase of DWI detection is what's called the vehicle in motion. Basically, they're looking to see if someone's driving in a way that would likely lead someone to believe they're impaired. So crossing the lanes is a very common one, swerving is a common one. So it makes sense that people who are committing traffic violations are more impaired than someone who's doing nothing wrong. And that's what these Friday checkpoints are doing. They're stopping people who are doing nothing wrong. And typically, once someone gets flagged to the checkpoint, the officer has them pull over to the side of the road, they ask them if they had anything to drink, and if someone says no, and doesn't stumble their words or fumble handling license or registration, anything like that, typically the police will let that person go. But if there's additional evidence, such as if someone says they're drinking, or the person gives some inconsistent responses, or has difficulty producing a license or registration, that's typically where the police will convert that checkpoint stop into basically an investigation at that point. And in regards to your question about local control, I don't think local control is important or is prudent in this case, just because all police have the same training. They're all going to have the same statistics. They're all going to know it's ineffective. So I do suggest that you ask the police if they're here to testify what percentages they give. But it doesn't make sense that it's, and I believe last time the trooper even testified some towns were just so incredibly ineffective, they just don't do it in that town. But besides that, because we do limit how the checkpoints are given, I think there should be consistency throughout the state. In regards to the other senator's questions about all checkpoints, so this specifically bans sobriety checkpoints. However, sobriety checkpoints are only lawful because we have a statute authorizing them. So the only other checkpoints I know of in New Hampshire are order checkpoints. And I know the ACLU is contesting that. That's federal, so unfortunately I don't think we can do much about it. But generally speaking, I mean, police just can't stop someone for no reason. And then the third type of checkpoint I would suggest is the one that was mentioned. If the officer is specifically looking for a type of car, or type of person, I expect that that's going to be allowed. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Senator Gannon has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question, because you priorly said you've done thousands of these, I believe. So that 1%, is that just for alcohol? Is there another percent or two for other drugs? What other percent are arrested for doing other illegal acts or being impaired in a different way?
Yeah, so the 1% for DWI, I included both alcohol and drugs. So when I was looking at the police or the newspapers that reported, I don't think they were distinguishing the two. If they did, I combined them because to me, it's DWI, whether it's alcohol or drugs. Then the more common arrests were, it used to be possession, but now the transporting is not an arrestable offense. That's going to go down, and typically driving without a license was the most common thing that I saw people be arrested for.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Representative. The chair will call John Marasco.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is John Marasco. I'm a major with the New Hampshire State Police. Formerly, I was a captain overseeing the Office of Highway Safety, and recently promoted to this position approximately 3 weeks ago. I testified on this bill in the House when it was being heard there. The position of the Department of Safety and the State Police is that we would oppose this bill for several reasons. The first is that sobriety checkpoints are authorized by the United States Supreme Court and the New Hampshire Supreme Court. Nationally, 1 in 3 traffic fatalities are caused by an impaired driver. Over the past 9 years, New Hampshire has had 399 impaired driving-related traffic deaths. The purpose of the sobriety checkpoint, to the representative's point, the numbers aren't always what you would think they would be, but really it is an opportunity for a deterrent effect for enforcement, and people are identified who are DWI and DUI, and you do have the opportunity to make sure that you take those people off the road before they kill themselves or somebody else. So it does provide for additional opportunity. In law enforcement, we view the sobriety checkpoints as an extra tool in the toolbox, another chance to make sure that we do the best we can to keep the motoring public safe. There is media messaging that goes along with the sobriety checkpoint before it's actually employed and afterwards as well. So that also highlights the importance of safe driving and also lets the public know that law enforcement is seeking out actively the impaired driver. As far as stats are concerned, in 2010, the number of law enforcement agencies that conducted sobriety checkpoints, there were 27. In 2017, there were 6. In 2010, the number of checkpoints that were conducted, 44, and in 2017, there were 25. Now those are the Office of Highway Safety funded checkpoints, which are the vast majority of the checkpoints throughout the state. Local agencies can choose, or the state police can choose to conduct their own checkpoint out of their own budgets, but by and large, it typically comes through NHTSA funds that come in through the New Hampshire Office of Highway Safety that are then shared with the local agencies and the state police to conduct the checkpoints. So that's where these statistics come from. The significance of these statistics is the fact that, as you can see, the number of checkpoints has gone down. It's gone down. And I think that's in large part looking at as well strategically, are we doing the best we can to set up these checkpoints in areas that they're going to be most effective. And so I can tell you that during my time in highway safety, we looked at some of the checkpoints that were underperforming in certain areas, and we have actually made some changes there to either not conduct those there again, move them to another location, or, and what we have done now, at least in the state police, is and actually to all law enforcement that will receive the money for fiscal year 2019, is to give them the opportunity to choose a saturation patrol. In other words, the 8 troopers that typically, or 8 police officers, or hybrid, that would be assigned to the checkpoint, use those individuals for a 6-hour roving patrol to do exactly what the state representative said, identify a traffic violation, effect a traffic stop, and then if there is signs of impairment, put that person through the field sobriety testing. It's a different strategy, but we certainly want to make sure that we open up all avenues to identify the drivers that should not be on the road. To further the statistical information in 2017, through the Office of Highway Safety, the data that I was provided with, 5,710 vehicles were stopped at sobriety checkpoints around the state, resulting in 20 DUI arrests. Again, 2007 case here in New Hampshire, State v. Hunt, the New Hampshire Supreme Court supported the deterrence effect that sobriety checkpoints have, and did not let the fact that the numbers might not be what people would first expect them to be as far as arrests go at the checkpoints. They didn't let that overshadow the deterrent effect, so that that case obviously was is well documented and heard. The state representative spoke about the petition to the Superior Court, so law enforcement can't simply go out and conduct a sobriety checkpoint without having that signed off on by a judge, to include the date, the time, the location, an operations plan, and as well as ensuring that the pattern of vehicles that are going to be stopped is allowed and authorized in advance. So they are, it's very regimented as far as how to actually apply for the sobriety checkpoint. Another area is that the last drink survey is something that is offered to those individuals who are encountered at the sobriety checkpoint and arrested. And that information, where they may have been drinking last, helps us identify establishments that may be problematic, and then the State Liquor Commission can go and conduct their investigation into what the problem may be there. Additionally, those that come to the checkpoint are surveyed as far as their perception of the checkpoint itself. Major Matt Shapiro has advised me that typically over 90% of the people who are waved over and are spoken to at the checkpoint but are not arrested, they have a high favorability of the checkpoint, and they actually believe that the checkpoint is somewhat non-invasive and it's appropriate, and it does provide for a deterrent effect. I guess I would leave you with this. It's difficult to quantify the deterrent effect, much like the DARE program, other programs that exist to educate, market the topic that you're looking to make sure people are aware of, and to ultimately guide people to make good decisions so that they don't hurt themselves or others. And I think that if you look at the number of articles that appeared in the Union Leader, specifically over the last year and a half, there are many crashes that have occurred out there that have taken lives, both due to alcohol, but many also due to drugs. And I think that with the opioid situation that we're currently dealing with in the state, now is probably not the time to be reducing the tools in law enforcement's toolbox to intersect and identify an impaired driver who may be under the influence of alcohol and or drugs. And so we do oppose this bill. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any questions? Senator Lasky? We're going to go through one by one. Does everybody have questions? Senator Lasky?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, and thank you. Is there any sort of pattern as to when and where you might do this? You did mention if there are certain areas where you think there's a high percentage of DUIs that you might do it there, but is there any other pattern?
That's a great question, Senator. We look at typically time of year. In many cases, summertime, spring, summer, early fall. Those are good times to operate the sobriety checkpoint due to maybe people that are out and going to these establishments. Ultimately, I can tell you that Chichester and Bow, I know that last year there were sobriety checkpoints that were conducted within those communities. And when I was advised of what the numbers or lack thereof were there, we made the decision that we weren't going to operate the sobriety checkpoints in those areas again. Whereas if you compare those to a sobriety checkpoint that is held in Seabrook, right there at the bridge that connects Hampton to Seabrook, that tends to be a very good sobriety checkpoint, depending on the particular night, where you can you'll see numbers that certainly justify the amount of time that was spent on the actual checkpoint, the preparation and the actual employment of it. So again, I think we have to do a better job of just identifying those areas that make the most sense to host it, and that's done by time of year, traffic volume, patterns of arrest in that area in the past, previous checkpoints that have been conducted in those areas. But I think we also have to expand the use of saturation patrols, which allow for mobile patrols in situations where the sobriety checkpoint isn't really doing the job we wanted to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator French?
Thank you. It's just my curiosity. If you set up with the court, so you're going to stop every third car, and so you stop once, but the next car is coming down and he's swerving all over the place. Can you stop him too, or do you have to let him go through?
Yes, so in a situation like that, when you observe the driving behavior that is concerning, you still have the opportunity, as you would if you were on a roving patrol, to stop that vehicle and prevent it from going any further.
Okay, I was just curious about that.
Very good question. Thank you.
Senator Gannon? Senator Hennessy?
Thank you, and thank you for taking the question. I actually have two, so one will be a follow-up, but I'm wondering if you could respond to what was said earlier about how, because there are 5 to 8 patrol out in a checkpoint stop, that in fact towns then don't have coverage during that time.
That's a very good question, Senator. The majority of the checkpoints typically are conducted by the state police because we have the requisite amount of personnel to cover those checkpoints. But in many cases, we will work those in conjunction with the local agency to alleviate any drain to the coverage. That being said, I mean, the majority of the checkpoints, again, are federally funded through the NHTSA money that comes through the Office of Highway Safety. So those are typically they are worked when they're federally funded by officers who are in an off-duty capacity. And so that's something that they're doing above and beyond their regular shift, and they have to sign up for that, and they're willing to go out and dedicate the 6-hour time frame to the actual detail itself. So that shouldn't affect coverage in any of the towns or within the state police, because that's above and beyond.
Thank you.
Follow-up?
My second question is that I spend an awful lot of time, I think we all do, driving back and forth to Concord. One of the things that I've read and that I've observed myself on the highway is that the crossing of lines, as was described as one of the ways of seeing whether somebody might, to pull over to find out if they are inebriated, is. But when I pass those people and I'm worried about them, they seem to be distracted by texting, etc. So I'm wondering again what the I don't know if you can say this, but when you pull over, how does it vary your effectiveness in pulling somebody over because they're crossing lines versus a checkpoint, and how many times are you actually seeing a distracted driver?
That's a great question. I see them all the time, as we all do. And certainly we receive calls from the public on a daily basis in many cases of people who have lane control issues. So they are crossing the fog line or the dotted line, they're back and forth in the lane. So we will stop those vehicles and make contact with the operator, identify what the issue is. In some cases it can be fatigue, it can be distraction, not using a cell phone but changing the radio station, a whole host of issues. But we do field those calls, we do take those opportunities, and if it is a violation, it's a flagrant violation, obviously we'll take enforcement action on that. As far as the impairment portion of it, when we do have those lane control issues, that many times, depending on the time of day, particularly on a Friday night, a Saturday night, that may be an indicator of somebody that might be driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. And if we approach that person, make contact, and through the stop for the lane control issue, it becomes apparent that there is something else going on there, whether the odor of alcohol or some other factors that would lead you to believe the person's impaired, then we would ask the person to participate in standardized field sobriety testing at roadside, and then from that determine whether or not they're fit to continue operating the vehicle or not. And if they're not, then we would obviously take them into custody at that point. But it's good to note that the Office of Highway Safety does receive money that can be used for distracted driving grants. And we do have troopers and police officers around the state who go out for 4-hour time periods, focused strictly on distracted driving. And the amount of enforcement that takes place during those grants is significant. And it is still a major problem in our state. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony this morning.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, the chair will call Kate Frank.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Kate Fry. I am the Vice President of Advocacy at New Futures. We are an organization that advocates, educates, and collaborates to improve health and wellness in New Hampshire. Our work includes supporting evidence-based policy regarding substance misuse, prevention, treatment, and recovery. We oppose House Bill 1283. Driving or operating a vehicle when the brakes are impaired by a substance puts many people at unnecessary risk, including the driver, his or her passengers, and other motorists and pedestrians. And the impacts of impaired driving are devastating, including loss of employment, injury, death, and significant costs associated with emergency services. Each day, people drive drunk almost 300,000 times, but fewer than 4,000 are arrested. And in 2012, 10.3 million people are reported driving under the influence or illicit drugs in the past year. There are studies that do show that sobriety checkpoints reduce drunk driving by 20%. There has been more of a trend to try to get rid of these points. But again, they've been shown effective to remove impaired drivers from the road. And also the value of deterrent can't be underestimated. As you heard earlier, it is hard to measure that, but it has been something that has been acknowledged as having a factor in it. Just knowing the checkpoints are out there is enough sometimes to stop people from driving while impaired. For your information, I've provided some New Hampshire specific information about our driving while impaired rates and what we can do about it. I had a much more extensive document from CDC regarding the evidence-based reviews of sobriety checkpoints. I had a fight with my copier today and a copier one, so I will send you those. What I did want to point out about what was said earlier, as far as the small amount actually being involving alcohol, I would agree to that, but I would also say that would really concern me is that you've really seen a spike in crashes in New Hampshire involving other drugs, marijuana, cocaine, prescription drugs, heroin. So I think these checkpoints are not only a tool for drunk driving, but also the increased rate we're seeing of driving under other substances.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will call Colleen Church.
I'm going to just go off script for a minute because I'm a neighbor of New Hampshire. I live in Connecticut, although my office is in Texas. So it's a great time to come home to Connecticut, and also my family, my son and daughter-in-law live in Hillsborough. So it's nice to come back.
Could you identify yourself for the
I'm
record,
sorry,
please? I'm not sure who this gentleman is.
Okay, this is William Church. He is my husband. So
okay.
It's also great to have him come along with me because I never get to see the man.
Okay.
So you are William Church, aren't you? Good. Make sure. My name is Colleen Sheehy Church, and I'm the national president of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I'm also a victim. My son Dustin was killed by a drunk driver in 2004. If there had been a sobriety checkpoint that night, Dustin could be alive today. I know that most of you, if not all of you, have children. Some of you have grandchildren. And you can imagine what it might feel like to lose a child. I don't want you or anyone else to suffer as my family has. So that's why I am here. I am here to testify against House Bill 1283, a bill that would eliminate sobriety checkpoints. A sobriety checkpoint is one of the tools that helps eliminate drunk driving. There are two misconceptions about sobriety checkpoints that need to be eliminated here. First, that they are unconstitutional. The United States Supreme Court found that they are constitutional in a ruling in 1990. The second misconception is that they are ineffective. People claim that because they have assigned, people claim that because they have assigned the wrong goal of a sobriety checkpoint. They were never designed to be solely measured by a number of arrests. Although arrests are made, they were designed to be a tool in the toolbox that helps eliminate drunk driving. They are a deterrent. They create awareness in the community, and they are highly publicized. In a systematic review of 11 high-quality studies, the Centers for Disease Control found that checkpoints reduced alcohol-related fatalities, injuries, and property damage by approximately 20%. Other studies find the same findings. All of those noted are in the back of the packet that I gave you, so you'll have everything cited, research data in the packet, so you will have that. That's why sobriety checkpoints are strongly remembered by the Center for Disease Control, and why Mothers Against Drunk Driving made sobriety checkpoints one of the pillars of our campaign to eliminate drunk driving. A sobriety checkpoint is not a roadblock. It is a very simple tool. Not every vehicle is stopped, only ones in a prearranged sequence. It is not random. People are not stopped based on the vehicle type, or their age, or ethnicity, or who's even riding in the car with the driver. And when properly conducted, a sobriety checkpoint will cause a delay of no more than 30 seconds. That's the time of one red light. While drunk driving still accounts for 30% of all traffic fatalities, here in New Hampshire, 30 seconds is certainly not too much to ask. In addition, sobriety checkpoints can help New Hampshire fight a growing scourge, drug driving. Officers have an opportunity to quickly assess impairment from anything, including alcohol, illegal drugs, and prescription drugs. Law enforcement needs to have every tool in their toolbox, whether it's a sobriety checkpoint, or saturation patrols, or drug recognition experts, or A-RIDE qualified officers. And law enforcement needs to be able to choose those tools that they feel will keep our New Hampshire roads safe. You know, each year here in the United States, approximately 1 million people are arrested for drunk driving. Those people cost our country $132 billion. That means that each crash and each arrest is costing approximately $132,000. And let me just qualify that. That takes into account law enforcement, fire departments, ambulance services, investigation, prosecution, the courts, incarceration, damages, hospitalization, and awful to say, but funerals. Each time a sobriety checker deters someone from drunk driving, that money is never spent. I realize that every state in the country is facing budget challenges. But literally cutting a program that actually can save money is not the answer. Therefore, I ask you to vote no on House Bill 1283. If you do, you will ultimately save money and save lives. You will keep New Hampshire safer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony this morning, Ms. Church. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much, and please accept our deepest condolences on the loss of your son. The chair will call Susan Duncan.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Susan Duncan, and I am just a member of the public today. I have no clue I would be here to this bill. But as a member of the motoring public and a New Hampshire resident, I'm adamantly opposed to this bill. I had an uncle killed by a drunk driver when I was a child. My two cousins grew up without a dad. This has a dramatic impact. I personally feel really good when I see posted in the Monitor or whatever newspaper I read it in that there's going to be a sobriety checkpoint. What we need to remember in this state is that alcoholism is a far greater problem in our society than drugs are, and we know that we have a significant issue with drugs. So I like it when I see my police out doing their jobs and checking the motoring public, that when my children are driving, that someone is watching, that it's safe for them to be on the road. I didn't intend to testify, but I am adamantly opposed to this bill and hope that you will vote it expedient to legislate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Ms. Duncan. Are there any questions?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you. Okay, the chair will call, okay, how about Mr. Ian Freeman?
Good morning, nice to see you all again this year. I'm Ian Freeman, I'm one of the co-chairmen of the New Hampshire Liberty Party, and I've also done a lot of police accountability work. I've been in the streets of New Hampshire observing some of these DUI checkpoints over several years, so got some experience at that. And I did see some of the testimony at the original House hearing on this, and I'm glad that we got some clarification on the 10% versus the 1%. Just to recap, I don't know if you were in the room for it, Senator Carson, but the officer who testified earlier said they, I don't remember what the time frame was, but they had 5,000 vehicle stops, over 5,000, and it was only 20 arrests for DUI. So if you do the calculation, that's actually less than 0.5% of the vehicles stopped. And at many of these checkpoints, even that is fairly high. I've looked at the statistics from several checkpoints that I've been involved with observing, and for instance, the most recent two that happened in Cheshire County that happened this year, they stopped, I don't know how many cars they stopped, but they found 0 DUIs in that case. However, they did write some tickets for some other things, as was testified previously. It was testified here that it's a tool, that law enforcement should have all the tools they can possibly have. Well, then let's just go ahead and give them DUI checkpoints all the time. I mean, if they are that effective, then why aren't they there every single night? How about during the daytime? People drink and drive during the day. Would everybody want to be stopped on their way to work and then on their way home every single day if it just saves one life? So the reason why we don't give law enforcement all of the tools that they could possibly have is because some of those tools would be unconstitutional. They would violate people's rights. So for instance, stop and frisk would be a tool that we've seen them use in a place like New York City, where they can just stop anybody on the streets and give them a frisk. And that's pretty problematic to me because people have the right to privacy and they shouldn't be treated like that. And the people at these sobriety checkpoints that are the real victims are the people who are inconvenienced by these suspicionless checkpoints. It was said that it only takes 30 seconds. I don't know if that's an average amount of time for talking to the officer at the window, but in my experience of having going through them, it tends to take a little longer than that, and certainly takes longer to get through the line of cars that has slowed down, especially on a busy night that is waiting to be checked. So people are inconvenienced quite a bit by this. More than a dozen states prohibit sobriety checkpoints, so New Hampshire would not be alone in its move in that direction. Some of them have ruled them unconstitutional, so even though it was mentioned that the Supreme Court has ruled it constitutional, it's important to remember that different states have different constitutions, and further, what the Supreme Court thinks is unconstitutional can change over time because all court decisions are just opinions, and as you've seen, the Supreme Court has certainly overturned itself on a number of different occasions. You even have the police coming in here and basically admitting that they don't think they're particularly effective. The number of checkpoints has gone down, and they've said the reason why is because they just feel like it's more effective to do the patrols, and that makes sense. Then you're targeting the people who you actually have a reasonable, articulable suspicion that the individual should be investigated and detained for potential DUI. So they're suspicionless, people's rights are being invaded, and then Senator French, you mentioned that you went through one of these. You were pulled over to a side street and asked questions about where you were and where you were going and so on and so forth. Those are pretty standard questions that the police will ask people as part of a fishing expedition. They're interested in having you maybe fumble with your words, maybe having you admit to something that sounds more suspicious. I just came from my drug dealer's house, or something like that. And that way they can further investigate you and possibly arrest you for something, again, that has nothing to do with DUI. And finally, I'd just like to add that I don't think this bill goes far enough. I think it's great that it's going to prohibit DUI checkpoints, but as was mentioned by Representative Hines, the ACLU is currently suing the state of New Hampshire over its participation, I believe, in the immigration checkpoints here in New Hampshire that the Border Patrol has been doing. So I'd like to see this bill amended to prohibit all checkpoints. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Mr. Freeman. Are there any questions from the committee? Senator Hannan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Freeman, would you believe that I believe that 20 drunk drivers off the road and one life saved is worth the slight inconvenience?
I believe that you believe that. However, those drunk drivers could very well have just been found and more effectively found by roving patrols that don't have to inconvenience anyone.
Thanks for your answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Thank you very much, Mr. Freeman. The chair will call Christopher Wade. Good morning, Mr. Wade.
Hi. So, my name is Christopher Wade. I am a media correspondent for a number of media outlets, and I've probably been to more DUI checkpoints than anybody. I am amazed at the amount of manipulation that is done on today from different other people here. I was arrested at one of these DUI checkpoints for crossing the street. Basically, the police were trying to intimidate people who were protesting and filming these checkpoints. And I just happened to be the person that they decided to target. The charges were eventually dropped after thousands of dollars were spent on lawyers and so on, because there was no crime against crossing the street. It's not a crime to film these checkpoints. I was just doing my job, as the police often say, for themselves and defending their own actions. What I have seen at these checkpoints is that certain people are let go. They're just 30 seconds, probably like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. We'll just assume 30 seconds for a moment. That's true. There are a lot of those people. If you're middle-aged and white, you're probably going to go through. I've never been terribly inconvenienced, but I've seen a lot of people who were minorities inconvenienced and people of color. I've seen people held frequently. In one checkpoint, I saw probably a dozen people are held for close to 30 minutes, probably 20 to 30 minutes. So yeah, it's inconvenient. It's a little bit inconvenient for me and probably most of the people here, but it's a lot inconvenient for people they are targeting. Most of most of these, so one of the things I did here recently was I wanted to see how the press releases, what's being reported by the police, actually, what the reality of it is. The press, there was a press release for Cheshire County that made it out that there were tons of people that were basically stopped and arrested for DUI, and we got all these people off the street that were drunk. Well, that wasn't the case. When I finally, after 3 months of waiting, I finally got back the 91A, which is a Freedom of Information Act request, or equivalent to that in New Hampshire. And there were 3 incidences. There were 2 of them were arrests, and 1 of them was a ticket violated. They were all minor things, and none of them were DUI. I was just floored because it contradicts everything that was being reported by the police and being reported by the media, because the media is basically just taking what the police are saying at face value. I've never had a drop of alcohol since I've been in New Hampshire, and this is over 2 years. I've never been heavy. I've only very rarely, for a very short time in college, even drank anything. I don't do drugs. And I'm just, to have thousands of people inconvenience, those thousands of people, that time adds up. It doesn't add up, at an individual level, but it adds up at an economic level. And it's unfortunate. Now, the justification for these checks is DUI, but that's not what they're being used for. They're being used for revenue generation, to ticket people for things that are insignificant. The car's a little bit too low to the ground. It might be safe, but it's a little too low to the ground. I saw officers, doing that. I've seen officers. One of the things actually that they'll always ask is license and registration. What does that have to do with stopping drunk drivers? Now you might think, oh well, it's probably a good thing to do. You might find somebody who doesn't have a license or whatever. But that's not just that only reason the stops are illegal, according to the Supreme Court, is because they're being used for catching people drunk. The statistics obviously back that up. We don't catch many of these, less than 0.5%. That was with drugs, by the way, not just DUI. So, one of the other things that I'm concerned about is that they're closing the sidewalks down in order to do these DUIs. And it's preventing non-vehicle traffic from going by. And in some cases, they're closing down the only major, or the only road, period, between different towns and such. So for example, I'm trying to think of the road, in Cheshire County, the one road, for example, where they did a stop, it was the major road, and they closed both sides of the road down, and the paths along the side, so people could not walk. And then they were threatening people, the police were literally threatening people if they went on to private property. They said they would get a trespass, they'd be trespassed. This is not a state I want to live in if our freedoms are taken away and we are abused as individuals. It's not just a matter, I would love to see fewer drunk drivers on the road. I am not against getting drunk drivers off the road. I am for that. But the statistics that are being pushed out there are misleading. It's more effective, you're going to get more drunk drivers off the road with roving patrols. And the funding is there to do that. You can do the checkpoints, fine. But you're going to get less people off the road who are drinking and driving than if you do the roving patrols. So, and the funding is there for either or. Like, it's not like if we stop doing the if we stop doing the checkpoints, the money goes away. It doesn't. It's still there for roving patrols. So the solution the solution is to eliminate the checkpoints and go for the roving patrols. And it's up to you as our leadership to say, no, this isn't right. This isn't the way to go. This isn't even effective. And that's basically what I have to say.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. White. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony this morning. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 1283? Representative Bitsy, please come forward and identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I'd like to remind you, we've heard a lot of testimony, so please don't repeat.
I will not.
Testimony.
I will not. Sitting here listening to all the testimony. For the record, I'm Representative Danitz. I represent Rockingham County District 10. And nobody has asked the fundamental question or presented the fundamental data, and that is whether or not these checkpoints are more or less effective than the other methods. If you consider they stop 1 in 3 cars, that means if inebriated individuals are evenly distributed among all the cars, that means 2/3 of the inebriated individuals are passing the checkpoint without question. If you remember that they are publicized, so that somebody who is, say, borderline, has their wits about them, but not maybe over the limit, is probably not going to go through the checkpoint. The real nugget is you have a night that there's a checkpoint. You have probably, given the limited number of checkpoints that there are in the state, 364 other nights in that jurisdiction that there are not checkpoints. Are the arrests for DUI more or less on the nights that there are checkpoints or the nights that they are not checkpoints? And I would suggest you do an interim study and find the answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony, Representative. Are there any questions? Seeing none? Thank you. We're going to go ahead and close the public hearing on House Bill 1283.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeen.com. Freekeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeen.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.